The lonely cowboy returns early to the ranch and finds the saloon dancer singing with his son. The dust kicked up in lazy spirals as Clay Henderson's horse picked its way down the familiar trail toward the Double Bar Ranch. October sun hung low over the Wyoming territory, painting the sagebrush and weathered fence posts in shades of amber and rust. He'd finished the cattle drive 3 days ahead of schedule, thanks to cooperative weather and a crew that knew their business. The thought of surprising his 8-year-old son Isaac brought the first genuine smile to Clay's weathered face in weeks. The ranch house came into view, its tin roof catching the afternoon light like a mirror. Smoke curled from the chimney, and Clay could make out the warm glow of lamplight through the windows. Strange, though, there was music drifting on the wind, a woman's voice, clear and sweet, singing something he didn't recognize. His housekeeper, Mrs. Paulson, had a voice like a rusty gate, so it wasn't her. Clay dismounted near the corral, his boots hitting the packed earth with a soft thud. The singing grew clearer as he approached the house, and underneath it he heard Isaac's young voice trying to follow along. The boy was laughing between verses, the sound bright and carefree in a way Clay hadn't heard in months. He paused at the porch steps, hat in his hands, listening. The woman was singing an old ballad about a river and a lost love, her voice carrying notes of longing that seemed to echo across the empty land. Through the window, he could see shadows moving inside, and his heart clenched with an emotion he couldn't name. The front door stood slightly ajar. Clay pushed it open slowly, the hinges creaking their familiar greeting. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. A woman sat at his old piano, the one that had gathered dust since his wife Margaret had died 2 years ago. Her dark hair was pinned up loosely, with escaped tendrils framing a face that was both delicate and strong. She wore a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, but there was something about the way she held herself that spoke of grace. Isaac sat beside her on the piano bench, his small fingers trying to find the keys while she guided him through the melody. "Like this, Miss Ruby," Isaac was saying, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The sad part comes here, right?" "That's perfect, sweetheart," the woman replied, and Clay felt something shift in his chest at the tenderness in her voice. Music tells stories just like books do. This song is about someone who's been away for a long time, missing home. Clay cleared his throat softly. Both faces turned toward him, Isaac's lighting up like sunrise. "Papa, you're back early!" The boy launched himself from the piano bench and into Clay's arms, nearly knocking him backward. "Miss Ruby's been teaching me piano. She knows all kinds of songs, and she makes the best cornbread, and she helped me with my arithmetic too." Over Isaac's head, Clay's eyes met the woman's. They were green, the color of new grass after spring rain, and they held a wariness that he recognized. It was the look of someone who'd learned not to expect kindness from the world. "Mr. Henderson," she said, rising from the piano bench with careful dignity. "I'm Ruby Sinclair. Mrs. Paulson took ill 3 days ago. Fever and chills, so I've been helping with Isaac while she recovers. Papa, Miss Ruby used to sing at the Silver Dollar in town, but she doesn't anymore." Isaac chattered on, oblivious to the tension in the room. "She knows songs from all over, even some in French." Clay set Isaac down gently, his mind racing. He knew about the Silver Dollar, the saloon at the far end of Willow Creek's main street. It wasn't the worst establishment in town, but it wasn't the kind of place respectable women frequented. Yet here was this woman, in his home, teaching his son piano and apparently caring for him with the kind of attention Isaac had been hungry for since Margaret's death. "Where's Mrs. Paulson now?" Clay asked, his voice careful and neutral. "Resting in her room," Ruby replied. "The doctor said it's not serious, just needs time and care. I've been sleeping on the settee in the parlor to keep an eye on both of them." Something in her tone made Clay look at her more closely. There were shadows under her eyes, and her hands showed the small cuts and calluses that came from hard work. She'd been taking care of a sick woman and his son for 3 days, probably getting little sleep herself. I didn't know Mrs. Paulson had kin in town, Clay said. Ruby's chin lifted slightly. She doesn't. I helped her once when she fell outside the general store. She remembered the kindness. She paused, then added quietly, "Not everyone gets second chances, Mr. Henderson. When someone offers one, it's worth taking." Isaac tugged at Clay's sleeve. "Papa, can Miss Ruby stay for supper? She promised to teach me the song about the cowboy and the mockingbird." Clay looked down at his son's hopeful face, then back at Ruby. There was something in her expression that reminded him of a wild creature poised to bolt at the first sign of threat. Yet she'd stayed here for 3 days, caring for strangers. "I reckon that would be fine," he said finally, "if Miss Ruby doesn't have other obligations." A small smile crossed her face, transforming it entirely. "I'd like that very much." As evening settled over the ranch, Clay found himself stealing glances at Ruby as she moved around his kitchen with quiet efficiency. She'd made a simple but hearty meal from what was in the larder: beans and bacon, fresh bread that must have been baked that morning, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Isaac chattered throughout dinner, telling Clay about everything they'd done while he was away. "Miss Ruby knows all about horses too," Isaac said around a mouthful of bread. "She helped me brush lightning, and she said I did real good with the curry comb." "She did she?" Clay glanced at Ruby, who was cutting Isaac's meat into smaller pieces without being asked. The gesture was so naturally maternal, it made his throat tight. "I grew up around horses," Ruby said simply. "My father was a wrangler before." She trailed off, then gathered herself. "Before things changed." After Isaac had been tucked into bed with a story and a song, Clay and Ruby found themselves alone in the kitchen. She was washing dishes in the basin, her movements economical and practiced. Clay picked up a dish towel and began drying. "You don't have to do that," Ruby said, glancing at him sideways. "My house, my dishes," Clay replied. "Besides, seems only fair after everything you've done." And they worked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of crockery and the distant call of a coyote on the wind. Finally, Clay spoke. "How long were you at the Silver Dollar?" Ruby's hands stilled in the washwater. 2 years, since I came to Willow Creek." "What brought you here?" She was quiet for so long, Clay thought she wouldn't answer. Then very softly she said, "I was running from something. Or maybe towards something. I'm still not sure which." Clay nodded. He understood about running. After Margaret died, he'd thought about leaving this place, starting fresh somewhere Isaac wouldn't see his mother in every corner of every room. But running didn't heal wounds. It just moved them somewhere else. "The singing," he said. "You're good at it, real good." "Thank you." Ruby's voice was barely above a whisper. "Music was the one thing that stayed with me, no matter how far I fell. You don't strike me as someone who's fallen far." Ruby turned to look at him then, her green eyes searching his face. "You don't know me, Mr. Henderson." "Maybe not," Clay admitted, "but I know you've been nothing but kind to my son. I know you cared for a sick woman who was practically a stranger to you. And I know Isaac's been happier these past 3 days than I've seen him in months." Tears gathered in Ruby's eyes, but she blinked them back. "He's a wonderful boy. He misses his mother terribly." "We both do." Clay set down the dish towel and leaned against the counter. "But maybe it's time we started living again instead of just surviving." The next morning brought Mrs. Paulson back to the kitchen, pale but determined to resume her duties. Ruby gathered her few belongings, a worn carpetbag and a faded shawl, and prepared to leave. Isaac clung to her skirts, begging her to stay. "I have to go, sweetheart," she said gently, kneeling to his level. "But I'll see you in town sometimes, and you can show me how much your piano playing has improved. But who's going to sing the good morning song, and who's going to help me with the hard words in my reader?" Clay watched the exchange, feeling something twist in his chest. Isaac had lost so much already. It seemed cruel to take away another source of joy. "Miss Ruby," he said suddenly, "would you consider staying on? As Isaac's tutor, I mean, and maybe help Mrs. Paulson with the heavier work. The pay would be fair. Ruby stood slowly, her eyes wide. Mr. Henderson, I don't think that would be proper. What would people say? People will talk regardless, Clay said. Question is, do we care more about what they think or what's best for Isaac? Mrs. Paulson spoke up from where she was stirring oatmeal at the stove. For what it's worth, I could use the help. And the boy's taken a powerful shine to you, Miss Ruby. Haven't seen him smile so much since... She trailed off diplomatically. Ruby looked between them, hope and uncertainty warring in her expression. I don't know if I'm the right person for this. Why don't you stay another week, Clay suggested. Give us all time to see how it works out. No commitments beyond that. That afternoon, while Isaac napped and Mrs. Paulson tended to the vegetable garden, Clay found Ruby sitting on the front porch, mending one of Isaac's shirts. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves. Penny for your thoughts, he said, settling into the chair beside her. Ruby smiled slightly. Just thinking about how strange life can be. 3 months ago, I never imagined I'd be sitting on a ranch porch, sewing patches on a little boy's shirt. What did you imagine? Mostly I tried not to imagine anything at all. It was safer that way. She set down her needlework and gazed out across the pasture, where Clay's horses grazed peacefully. I learned early that hoping for things just made it hurt worse when they were taken away. Clay studied her profile, noting the determined set of her jaw and the way her hands were never quite still. What was taken away? Ruby was quiet for a long moment. Then, as if she'd made a decision, she began to speak. My father owned a small ranch in Colorado, nothing grand, but we were happy. He taught me to ride and rope, and my mother taught me music and letters. When I was 16, he was accused of rustling cattle from a neighboring spread. The evidence was fabricated, but the neighbor had more money and influence than we did. Her voice grew steadier as she continued, as if telling the story was helping her process it. Father was shot trying to prove his innocence. Mother died of a fever that same winter. I think she died of grief, really. The ranch was sold to pay debts that weren't ours, and I found myself with nothing but the clothes on my back and a trunk full of sheet music. How did you end up at the Silver Dollar? Desperation makes you do things you never thought you would, Ruby said simply. I could sing, and that was about the only skill that could earn me enough to eat, but I only sang, nothing else. Clay nodded, understanding the distinction she was making. And now I'm not sure what I am anymore. I'm not the rancher's daughter I used to be, but I'm not just a saloon singer either. She looked at him directly. Your son sees something in me that I'm not sure exists. Children are good judges of character, Clay said. They see past the surface to what's really there. And what do you see when you look at me? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Clay considered his answer carefully. I see a woman who's survived things that would break most people. I see someone who's kind to a lonely boy and patient with his fumbling attempts at piano. I see someone who works hard and expects nothing in return. He paused. And I see someone who's afraid to trust that good things might actually happen to her. Ruby's eyes filled with tears. She didn't try to hide this time. What if I disappoint you? What if I disappoint Isaac? What if you don't? That evening, after Isaac had gone to bed, Clay and Ruby sat in the parlor while she played piano softly. The music filled the spaces between them, saying things that words couldn't. Clay found himself watching her hands on the keys, the way she swayed slightly with the melody, the peaceful expression on her face. Play something happy, he said when she finished a particularly melancholy piece. Ruby smiled and launched into a lively tune that made Clay's boots tap against the floor. When she finished, she turned to him with a laugh. Your turn. I bet you know some songs. I'm not much of a singer. Everyone's a singer when nobody's judging. She slid over on the piano bench, making room for him. Come on, just one song. Clay found himself moving to sit beside her. close enough to catch the faint scent of soap and something uniquely her. She showed him where to place his fingers on the keys, her touch gentle and sure. "Now what's a song you remember from childhood?" Clay thought for a moment, then began humming an old tune his mother used to sing. Ruby picked out the melody on the piano, encouraging him with nods and smiles. Soon they were singing together, their voices blending in the warm circle of lamplight. If this story has touched your heart so far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with friends who love Old West stories. As the days passed, Ruby settled into the rhythm of ranch life like she'd been born to it. She helped Mrs. Paulson with the cooking and cleaning, tutored Isaac in reading and arithmetic, and somehow found time to tend a small herb garden behind the kitchen. In the evenings, she and Clay would sit on the porch, after Isaac was asleep, talking about everything and nothing while the stars wheeled overhead. Clay found himself looking forward to those conversations more than he cared to admit. Ruby had opinions about everything: politics, literature, the best way to train a horse, and she wasn't afraid to voice them. She challenged him in ways he hadn't experienced since Margaret, but it was different too. Where Margaret had been gentle and accommodating, Ruby was direct and passionate. One evening in late October, Clay came back from checking the fence line to find Ruby in the barn, brushing down his horse Star. The mare was notoriously difficult with strangers, but she stood placidly under Ruby's ministrations, occasionally turning her head to nuzzle Ruby's shoulder. "She likes you," Clay observed, leaning against the stall door. "We understand each other," Ruby said, running the brush along Star's neck in long, smooth strokes. "She's been hurt before, makes her careful about who she trusts." "And do you trust me?" Ruby's hand stilled on the brush. "I'm learning too." That night, a storm blew in from the west, bringing wind and rain that rattled the windows and sent tree branches scraping against the roof. Clay was checking the shutters when he heard crying from Isaac's room. He found Ruby already there, sitting on the edge of Isaac's bed while the boy clung to her nightgown. "The noise scared him," she explained softly. "Storms remind him of the night his mother died." Clay's heart clenched. Margaret had died during a winter storm, when the doctor couldn't get through to help with her fever. Isaac had been only 6, old enough to understand that the howling wind meant his mother wasn't coming back. Clay sat on the other side of the bed, smoothing Isaac's dark hair. "It's just wind and rain, son. Nothing that can hurt us." "But what if something happens to you too, Papa? What if you go away like Mama did?" Before Clay could answer, Ruby began singing softly. It was a lullaby Clay remembered from his own childhood, about a guardian angel watching over sleeping children. Her voice was warm and soothing, cutting through the storm's noise like a candle flame in the darkness. Gradually, Isaac's sobs quieted, and his grip on Ruby's nightgown loosened. She continued singing until his breathing evened out and his eyes closed. Then she carefully tucked the blankets around him and stood to leave. In the hallway, Clay caught her arm gently. "Thank you," he said. "I couldn't have calmed him down that fast." "He just needed to know he wasn't alone with his fear," Ruby replied. "We all need that sometimes." They stood there in the dim hallway, the storm raging outside, and Clay felt something fundamental shift between them. Without really thinking about it, he reached up and touched her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin. "Ruby," he said, her name barely a whisper. She leaned into his touch for just a moment before stepping back, her eyes wide and uncertain. "I should go back to my room." Clay nodded, though every instinct told him to follow her, to find the words that would erase the walls she'd built around her heart. Instead, he watched her disappear into the darkness and tried to ignore the longing that had taken up permanent residence in his chest. November brought the first real cold snap, and with it, preparations for winter. Clay spent long days cutting firewood and winterizing the outbuildings, while Ruby helped Mrs. Paulson preserve vegetables and mend clothes. Isaac thrived under Ruby's patient instruction, his reading improving by leaps and bounds. But Clay noticed that Ruby seemed increasingly restless as the days grew shorter. She would stand at the kitchen window, staring out at the grey landscape with an expression he couldn't read. Sometimes he caught her looking at her old carpet bag with something like longing. The crisis came on a cold Thursday afternoon when Clay returned from town with disturbing news. He found Ruby in the parlor, teaching Isaac a new song on the piano. "Ruby," he said, his voice more serious than usual. "I need to speak with you, privately." Isaac looked up from the piano keys with curiosity, but Clay ruffled his hair and said, "Why don't you go help Mrs. Paulson with the bread? I'll bet she could use another set of hands." Once they were alone, Clay sat heavily in his chair by the fire. "I heard something in town today about why you left Colorado." Ruby went very still, her hands frozen on the piano keys. "What did you hear?" "There's a man named Vincent Murdoch asking questions about a young woman matching your description. Says she stole money from him and ran off." "That's a lie," Ruby said fiercely, spinning around to face him. "I never stole anything from Vincent Murdoch. I believe you, but he's convinced the sheriff otherwise. He's offering a reward for information leading to your whereabouts." Ruby stood abruptly, beginning to pace the small room like a caged animal. "Vincent Murdoch was the man who framed my father. After Papa died, he came to me with a proposition, said he'd make sure I was taken care of if I agreed to certain arrangements. When I refused, he spread lies about me stealing from his safe." Clay felt anger building in his chest, hot and dangerous. "What kind of arrangements?" Ruby's cheeks flamed red, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "He wanted me to be his mistress. Said a woman in my position couldn't afford to be particular about her virtue." She laughed bitterly. "I chose poverty over prostitution. Apparently that made me a thief in his eyes." "Ruby." Clay stood and crossed to her, taking her shoulders gently in his hands. "You did nothing wrong, nothing." "It doesn't matter what's true," Ruby said, her voice breaking. "He has money and influence. I have nothing but the word of a disgraced saloon singer. If he's tracked me here, I have to leave." "I won't bring that kind of trouble to you and Isaac." "The hell you will." Ruby stared at him in shock. Clay rarely cursed, and never with such vehemence. "You're not running anymore, Ruby Sinclair. Not from the truth, and not from the life you've built here. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. I understand that you're the best thing that's happened to Isaac since his mother died. I understand that you've brought music and laughter back into this house. And I understand that I'm halfway in love with you, which means I'll be damned if I let some lying bastard chase you away." Ruby's mouth fell open. "Clay, you can't mean that." "Can't I?" He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize had fallen. "I've been alone for 2 years, Ruby, alone and angry, and so focused on just surviving each day that I forgot what it felt like to hope for something better. You changed that. You made me remember who I used to be. But your reputation, my reputation is my concern. As for the rest of it, well, sometimes a man has to decide what he's willing to fight for." Before Ruby could respond, Isaac's voice called from the kitchen. "Papa, Miss Ruby, come quick, there's riders coming up the road." Clay and Ruby rushed to the window, where they could see 3 men on horseback approaching the ranch. Even from a distance, Clay could tell they weren't friendly visitors. Their posture was too rigid, too purposeful. "Get Isaac and go to the root cellar," Clay said quietly. "Take Mrs. Paulson with you." "Clay, no, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." He turned to face her one last time, memorizing her features in case this went badly. "Ruby, listen to me. Whatever happens out there, you need to know that these weeks with you have been the happiest I've had since Margaret died. You've given Isaac something I couldn't, hope for the future. That's worth fighting for." The riders pulled up in the yard just as Clay stepped onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready. The man in the lead was well-dressed and soft-looking, with the kind of pale skin that spoke of indoor work and easy living. This had to be Vincent Murdoch. "Henderson," Murdoch called out. "Vincent Murdoch, I believe you have something that belongs to me." "I doubt that," Clay replied evenly. "I'm pretty careful about what I take that isn't mine." Murdoch dismounted, flanked by two men who were clearly hired guns. "A young woman named Ruby Sinclair. She's a thief and a whore, and she's stolen from me. I have legal papers for her arrest." Clay's finger tightened on his rifle, but his voice remained calm. "That's interesting, because the Ruby Sinclair I know is a respectable woman who's been caring for my son. Doesn't sound like the same person." "Don't play games with me, Henderson. I know she's here. I have witnesses who saw her in town with your boy. Then maybe you should explain to me exactly what she's supposed to have stolen." Murdoch's face flushed red. $500 from my safe. "But this isn't just about money. The woman has information that could be damaging to certain business interests." "What kind of information?" "The kind that could send a man to prison if it got to the wrong ears." Murdoch's smile was cold and threatening. "She has letters that could implicate me in certain irregularities regarding land acquisitions." Clay felt the pieces clicking into place. "Land acquisitions like the Sinclair Ranch?" "Among others. The woman's father was a fool who kept records of things that weren't his business. When he died, those records should have been destroyed. Instead, the girl took them when she ran. So she didn't steal money. She took evidence that you murdered her father and stole his land." Murdoch's hand moved toward his gun, but Clay was ready for him. The rifle came up smoothly, its muzzle centered on Murdoch's chest. "I wouldn't," Clay said softly. "I've got nothing to lose, and you've got everything to lose. Which one of us do you think is more motivated to pull this trigger?" From behind him came a voice that made Clay's heart race with fear and pride in equal measure. "Actually, Mr. Murdoch, there might be a third option." Ruby stepped onto the porch, a leather satchel in her hands. Isaac and Mrs. Paulson were nowhere to be seen, which meant they'd followed Clay's instructions and were safely hidden. "Ruby, get back inside," Clay said urgently. "No." Her voice was steady, stronger than Clay had ever heard it. "This has to end." She held up the satchel. "These are the documents you're so worried about, Vincent. Letters in your own handwriting describing how you planned to frame my father for rustling so you could buy his land cheap. Receipts showing you paid the witnesses who testified against him. Even a letter to your business partner bragging about how easy it was to fool the local sheriff." Murdoch's face had gone pale. "You little bitch! You've been carrying those around for 2 years. "Insurance," Ruby said simply, "though I never imagined I'd have the courage to use it. Hand them over and maybe I'll let you live." Ruby laughed, the sound bright and fearless. "I don't think so. You see, I've already made copies. One set is with a lawyer in Denver, with instructions to send them to the territorial marshal if anything happens to me. Another set is in a safe deposit box in Cheyenne with similar instructions." "You're bluffing." "Am I? Are you willing to bet your life on that?" Ruby stepped forward, and Clay was amazed to see that she wasn't trembling at all. "Here's what's going to happen, Vincent. You're going to get back on your horse and ride away. You're never going to bother me again or threaten anyone I care about. And if I hear that you've hurt another innocent family the way you hurt mine, those documents will be in the hands of every newspaper and law office between here and Washington." Murdoch looked between Ruby and Clay, calculating his odds. 2 against 3 should have favored him, but Clay's rifle hadn't wavered, and Ruby's confidence was clearly shaking his certainty. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Yes, it is," Ruby replied. "It's been over since the day you decided to destroy my family for profit. I just needed to find the courage to end it." As the 3 men mounted their horses and rode away, Clay let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The rifle felt incredibly heavy in his hands all of a sudden. "Ruby," he said, turning to face her, "that was the bravest, most foolish thing I've ever seen anyone do." I couldn't let him hurt you or Isaac because of me." Her voice was shaking now that the danger was over. "I couldn't run again, Clay. You were right. I'm tired of being afraid." Clay set the rifle aside and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She felt so small and fragile, but he knew now that there was nothing fragile about Ruby Sinclair. She was steel wrapped in silk, strength disguised as softness. "Were you bluffing? About the copies?" Ruby pulled back to look at him, a mischievous smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "What do you think?" Clay laughed despite himself. "I think you're full of surprises, Miss Sinclair." That evening, after Isaac had been told an edited version of the day's events and put to bed with extra hugs and reassurance, Clay and Ruby sat in the parlor. The fire crackled peacefully, a stark contrast to the drama of the afternoon. "So, what happens now?" Ruby asked. "With Murdoch, I mean." "I suspect he'll find somewhere else to be for a while," Clay said. "Men like that are cowards at heart. He'll go find easier prey." Ruby nodded, staring into the flames. "I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about being halfway in love with me." Clay felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I'm sorry if that made you uncomfortable. It wasn't planned." "Oh, only halfway?" Ruby asked, her voice teasing. Clay looked at her sharply, trying to read her expression. "Ruby, because I'm pretty sure I'm completely in love with you," she said quietly. "And with Isaac, and with this life we've built together. It scares me to death, but I can't imagine being anywhere else." Clay stared at her for a long moment, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. Then he crossed to where she sat and knelt beside her chair. "Ruby Sinclair, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that I don't want to run anymore. I want to stay here, with you and Isaac. I want to teach him piano and help him with his lessons and sing him to sleep when storms frighten him. I want to grow old watching sunsets from this porch." She touched his face gently. "I want to love you for the rest of my life, if you'll let me." Clay's answer was to kiss her, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, Ruby was smiling through her tears. "Is that a yes?" "That's a hell yes," Clay said, making her laugh. "Though I suppose we should make it official. Isaac's been dropping hints about wanting a mother for Christmas. Has he now? Subtle as a stampede, that boy. Yesterday he asked if you knew how to make wedding cakes." Ruby laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the warm room. "Well, I suppose I'll have to learn." They were married on Christmas Day, in the parlor with Isaac as ring-bearer and Mrs. Paulson as witness. The circuit preacher pronounced them husband and wife as snow fell softly outside the windows, covering the world in pristine white. Isaac whooped with joy and threw himself into Ruby's arms, calling her Mama for the first time. That evening, as they sat around the piano singing Christmas carols, Clay reflected on the strange turns life could take. A year ago, he'd been a bitter, lonely man counting the days until spring. Now he had a wife who filled his house with music and laughter, a son who smiled more than he frowned, and a future bright with possibility. Ruby caught him watching her and smiled, her fingers never faltering on the keys. "What are you thinking about?" "Just how lucky I am," Clay said. "A lonely cowboy coming home early and finding the most beautiful surprise of his life." "The surprise was mutual," Ruby said softly. "I found home when I wasn't even looking for it." As the snow continued to fall and the fire burned low, they sang late into the night, their voices blending in harmony. Outside, the wind no longer sounded lonely. It sounded like a lullaby, like a promise, like the beginning of something beautiful. The stories we share on our channel are fictional creations meant to inspire and entertain, not to offend anyone. If you enjoyed this tale of love, courage, and second chances on the frontier, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, comment with your thoughts, and share it with others who appreciate stories of the Old West. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we look forward to bringing you more heartwarming tales from America's frontier days.